The slave markets of Zephyria Prime stank of desperation and broken dreams. Alien species from across the galaxy stood chained in rows, their eyes vacant, their spirits crushed under the weight of endless servitude. The Korthak Empire had perfected the art of breaking minds long before they broke bodies, and their slave trade flourished in the Outer Rim territories where galactic law held no power. Kira pressed herself against the cold metal bars of her cage, her luminescent blue skin dimmed to a pale gray from malnutrition and despair. Her people, the Silithai, had once been known throughout the galaxy as master engineers and architects, capable of building structures that defied physics itself. Their homeworld had been a paradise of floating cities and crystalline towers that sang in harmony with solar winds. That was before the Korthak came. The memory of that day still haunted her dreams. She had been working in the great library of Silith, cataloging ancient engineering texts, when the invasion ships blotted out their twin suns. The Korthak didn't just conquer worlds, they consumed them. Everything of value was stripped away: resources, technology, and people. The Silithai resistance had lasted exactly 47 hours against the Empire's war machine. Kira touched the neural collar around her neck, feeling the cold metal that had been her constant companion for 3 years. The device didn't just prevent escape, it slowly erased memories, emotions, and, eventually, the very sense of self. She had watched hundreds of her fellow prisoners fade into empty shells, their eyes becoming as blank as polished stones. Yet somehow, she had held on to fragments of who she used to be. The marketplace buzzed with activity as potential buyers examined their merchandise. Korthak overseers cracked energy whips in the air, their forearms moving with practiced efficiency as they herded slaves into viewing areas. The buyers were a mix of species, some seeking labor for mining operations, others wanting servants for their estates, and a few whose intentions were far darker. A commotion at the market's entrance caught everyone's attention. A lone figure pushed through the crowd, and Kira felt her breath catch in her throat. She had heard whispers about this species, spoken in hushed tones even among the Korthak guards. Humans. The newcomers to the galactic stage who had somehow managed to carve out territory in space that even the Empire respected. The human was shorter than most species present, but there was something in his posture that made others step aside. His skin was a warm brown color, and his dark hair was cropped short in what she would later learn was a military style. He wore simple clothes, a brown jacket and dark pants, but the way he moved suggested someone comfortable with violence. Marcus Chen had been tracking slave ships for 6 months, following a trail of misery across 3 systems. As a former military intelligence officer turned freelance operative, he had seen enough of the galaxy's darker corners to know that some fights were worth picking even when the odds were impossible. The distress signal he'd intercepted from the Silithai homeworld had led him here, though he arrived 3 years too late to prevent the tragedy. He moved through the market with purpose, his enhanced cybernetic eye recording everything while his natural one searched for something specific. The Korthak had a reputation for thorough genocide, but intelligence suggested some Silithai had survived as slaves. Their engineering knowledge would be invaluable to rebuilding efforts, assuming any could be found. Kira watched the human approach her section of the market, noting how the other slaves straightened slightly in his presence. There was something different about him, something that didn't belong in this place of broken hope. When their eyes met, she felt a shock of recognition that had nothing to do with memory. It was the look of someone who still fought, even in the darkest circumstances. Marcus stopped in front of her cage, pretending to examine her as a potential purchase while his enhanced eye scanned the neural collar. The technology was Korthak standard, designed to gradually lobotomize the wearer while making them compliant. But the readings showed something interesting. This particular slave's brain patterns indicated active resistance to the conditioning. "This one," he said to the Korthak overseer, pointing at Kira. "What's her specialty?" The 4-armed alien consulted his datapad with 2 hands while keeping the other 2 on his weapons. "Silithai engineer. Somewhat defective, shows signs of persistent memory retention despite 3 years of conditioning. Recommend immediate neural adjustment before use." "I prefer my technical staff to retain some creativity," Marcus replied smoothly. "What's the price?" The negotiation that followed was brief but intense. Korthak traders respected strength above all else, and Marcus had learned to project just enough controlled violence to be taken seriously without triggering a firefight he couldn't win. The price was steep enough credits to buy a small starship, but he had resources from his previous military career and some benefactors who shared his particular interests. As the ownership transfer was completed, Kira felt the neural collar shift modes. Instead of the constant suppression field, it now simply tracked her location and vital signs. The relief was immediate and overwhelming. Thoughts she hadn't been able to complete in months suddenly flowed freely, and she remembered things she thought had been lost forever. Marcus led her through the market without speaking, but she could sense his alertness as they moved toward the exit. They passed other cages filled with species she recognized, some from worlds that had fallen to the Korthak decades ago, others more recent casualties of the Empire's expansion. Each face was a story of loss and survival that would haunt her forever. The spaceport was a sprawling complex of landing platforms and warehouses, filled with ships from across the galaxy. Marcus's vessel was a modified courier ship, sleek enough to outrun most pursuit but armed enough to discourage casual pirates. The hull bore scorch marks from recent action, and Kira could see weapon ports hidden behind retractable panels. Inside, the ship was surprisingly comfortable. The main cabin featured real furniture instead of the standard acceleration couches, and there were windows showing star fields instead of blank metal walls. Marcus gestured for her to sit while he activated the ship's systems. "My name is Marcus Chen," he said as the engines powered up. "I'm going to remove that collar once we're clear of the system, but first I need to know, do you remember anything about Sci-Fi shield technology?" The question hit Kira like a physical blow. Shield technology had been her specialty before the invasion, and the knowledge was exactly what the Korthak had been trying to extract from captured Sci-Fi engineers. That this human knew to ask about it specifically suggested intelligence gathering that went far beyond casual curiosity. "Why?" she asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. Marcus was quiet for a moment as he guided the ship out of the atmosphere. "Because there are 12 more Sci-Fi and slave markets across this sector, and I intend to buy their freedom. But first, I need to know if what I'm planning is possible." Through the viewport, Kira watched Zephyria Prime fall away beneath them. The planet's surface was scarred with strip mines and factory complexes, its natural beauty sacrificed to feed the Empire's endless hunger for resources. Somewhere down there, the slave markets continued their grim trade, but, for the first time in 3 years, she was free to think about something other than mere survival. "The shield matrices require quantum resonance crystals," she said slowly, testing whether the words would trigger the collar's punishment systems. When nothing happened, she continued. "The Korthak destroyed our crystal farms during the invasion, but there might be alternatives. I'd need to see technical specifications for human power systems." Marcus smiled, and it was the first genuine expression of hope Kira had seen in longer than she could remember. "I was hoping you'd say that. We have 3 days to reach the next market, and I'll need every detail you can remember about defensive systems." As the ship jumped to hyperspace, leaving Zephyria Prime behind as just another point of light, Kira felt something she had thought was gone forever beginning to stir in her chest. It wasn't just hope, it was purpose. The Korthak had taken everything from her people, but knowledge was something that could be rebuilt, shared, and used to ensure that what happened to Syleth would never happen again. The neural collar around her neck had become little more than jewelry, its suppression fields inactive. For the first time in 3 years, she was truly free to think, to plan, and to remember who she used to be. The woman who had once designed shields capable of stopping planetary bombardments was still there, buried under layers of trauma but not broken. Marcus worked at his navigation console, plotting courses to 12 different worlds where intelligence suggested Sci-Fi survivors might be found. It would be dangerous work. Some of those markets were in the heart of Korthak space, others controlled by pirates or worse. But he had made a promise to a dying world, and humans had a reputation for keeping their word regardless of the cost. "Tell me about your people," he said as the ship settled into its hyperspace trajectory. "Not just the technical knowledge, tell me who they were before the Empire came." Kira closed her eyes and let herself remember. The floating cities that danced with gravitational currents. The crystal singers who could make matter itself resonate with pure harmony. The children who learned to build before they could walk, creating impossible structures from imagination and mathematics. A civilization that had spent 10,000 years proving that beauty and function were not opposing forces. "We were builders," she said simply. "We took empty space and filled it with wonders. The Korthak saw our cities and thought they understood what they were conquering, but they never realized that the real treasure wasn't in what we built, it was in knowing how to build it. The ship continued through hyperspace, carrying its 2 passengers toward an uncertain future. Behind them lay a galaxy where slavery and conquest were treated as simple economics. Ahead lay markets where the remnants of a civilization could be purchased like any other commodity. But, between the past and the future, in the quiet space of a small ship traveling faster than light, something was being born that neither the Korthak Empire nor its enemies had anticipated. A human and a Silithai working together to preserve knowledge that could reshape the balance of power in the Outer Rim. It wasn't the beginning of a rebellion, not yet. But it was the first step toward proving that some things in the galaxy were more valuable than credits, and some prices were too high for any civilized being to pay. The neural collar around Kira's neck had become a symbol of everything the Empire represented: control through suffering, progress through destruction, order through fear. But, as she felt her mind expanding back to its full capability, she began to understand that freedom wasn't just the absence of chains. It was the presence of choice, the power to decide not just what to do but who to be. And, for the first time in 3 years, Kira was free to choose. The orbital station around Kepler's edge looked like a mechanical spider web stretched between 3 captured asteroids. It was neutral territory, one of the few places where Korthak, human, and independent traders could conduct business without immediately trying to kill each other. Marcus guided his ship through the busy traffic lanes while Kira studied the tactical displays, her engineering mind automatically cataloging defensive positions and structural weaknesses. 3 days of hyperspace travel had given them time to plan, but, more importantly, it had given Kira time to heal. The neural collar was gone now, cut away with surgical precision once they were safely away from Zephyria Prime. The scars on her neck would fade, but the memories of having her thoughts constrained and controlled would take much longer to process. The slave market here is different, Marcus explained as they approached the docking bay. More discreet, higher-end clients. They deal in specialists, scientists, artists, rare genetic types. The Korthak don't run it directly, but they take a percentage of all sales. Kira nodded, her fingers working across a portable engineering tablet. Over the past 3 days, she had been reconstructing Silithai shield technology from memory, filling in gaps with human theoretical physics and quantum mechanics. What she had created wasn't exactly like the old designs, but it might actually be better, a fusion of 2 completely different approaches to manipulating energy fields. The power requirements are still substantial, she said, showing Marcus her latest calculations. A shield strong enough to protect a city would need either a fusion reactor or a very large quantum battery array. But a personal shield, something that could protect a small ship or even an individual person, that's definitely possible with human technology. Marcus studied the display with interest. Personal energy shields had been science fiction for humans until recently, when contact with galactic civilization revealed that several species had solved the technical challenges. The applications for rescue operations would be enormous, allowing operatives to survive in hostile environments long enough to complete their missions. The docking bay was busy with activity as crews loaded and unloaded cargo from ships representing dozens of different species. Marcus had learned to identify potential threats by watching movement patterns and body language, skills that translated surprisingly well across species barriers. Today, the atmosphere felt tense in a way that suggested trouble brewing. "Stay close," he told Kira as they made their way through the station's corridors. "If something goes wrong, head back to the ship and wait for me there." The slave market was hidden behind a legitimate art gallery, accessible only to buyers who could provide the correct authorization codes. Marcus had purchased his credentials from a black market information broker, paying enough to ensure the codes would work at least long enough for one visit. Inside, the atmosphere was completely different from the brutal efficiency of Zephyria Prime. Here, slaves were displayed like museum pieces, each one presented with detailed information about their skills, background, and psychological profile. The buyers moved quietly between displays, examining their potential purchases with the careful attention of collectors evaluating rare artifacts. Kira felt her skin crawl as she recognized the clinical detachment in their voices. These people weren't buying laborers or even servants, they were acquiring trophies, living proof of their power and wealth. In some ways, it was even worse than the crude brutality of the standard markets. Marcus moved through the displays with professional calm, but Kira could see the tension in his shoulders. He had explained during their journey that his interest in freeing Silithai slaves wasn't purely humanitarian, though that was certainly part of it. The human government was involved in a complex political situation that required advanced defensive technologies, and Silithai engineering expertise could provide crucial advantages. They found the first Silithai in a display case designed to showcase technical specialists. Jorin had been a crystal singer before the invasion, one of the rare individuals who could manipulate matter at the quantum level through harmonic resonance. His file indicated that previous buyers had used his abilities for mining operations, forcing him to extract precious metals from asteroids under conditions that would kill most other species. The second was in a different section entirely, a female named Vera whose specialty was biomechanical integration. She had been sold and resold multiple times, her knowledge used to create hybrid technologies that merged organic and mechanical systems. The psychological profile noted that she had become increasingly unresponsive over the past year, showing signs of complete dissociation. Marcus negotiated for both purchases simultaneously, playing the role of a collector interested in assembling a complete Silithai technical team. The process took hours, involving complex financial arrangements and background checks that probed deeper into his fabricated identity than he was entirely comfortable with. While the paperwork was processed, Kira studied the facility's security systems with growing unease. The station's layout was designed to funnel traffic through specific choke points, and she could identify at least 6 different ways the exits could be sealed if something went wrong. More concerning were the subtle energy signatures she detected, weapon systems that were far more sophisticated than anything that should exist on a neutral trading post. "Something's wrong," she whispered to Marcus when they had a moment alone. "This place has military-grade defensive systems. The power consumption patterns are all wrong for a civilian facility." Before Marcus could respond, an announcement echoed through the station's communication system. All ships were ordered to remain docked pending a security inspection by Korthak Imperial forces. The casual atmosphere in the market immediately shifted to barely controlled panic as buyers and sellers alike realized they had been trapped. "Korthak patrol fleet just dropped out of hyperspace," Marcus said quietly, checking his communication device. 3 heavy cruisers and a support group. "They're demanding the station surrender all records of recent transactions." Kira felt the familiar ice of terror creeping up her spine. The Korthak didn't conduct random inspections of neutral territory, they were here for something specific. Or someone specific. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental. "They're tracking freed slaves," she realized. "The neural collars, they must have some kind of long-range identifier that I didn't know about." Marcus considered their options with the quick efficiency of someone trained for crisis situations. The station was surrounded, their ship was locked down in the docking bay, and they were carrying 2 newly purchased slaves whose freedom had probably triggered whatever surveillance system the Korthak were using. "We need another way out," he said. "Can you access the station's engineering systems?" Kira was already moving toward a maintenance access panel, her fingers flying over the interface as she hacked into the station's computer network. Silithai engineering training included extensive education in system integration, and she quickly located the schematics for the entire facility. "There," she said, pointing to a section of the display. "Waste processing system. The pipes are large enough for human-sized beings, and they connect to an external disposal facility that should have its own small ships for debris removal." Meanwhile, Joren and Vera had been brought to a holding area pending completion of the purchase. Both wore the blank expressions of people who had learned that hope was a luxury they couldn't afford, but Kira could see sparks of awareness beginning to return as their neural collars were deactivated. Marcus made a decision that would have been impossible to explain to his superiors. Instead of abandoning the mission to save himself, he triggered the emergency release codes for all slave restraints in the facility. Immediately, alarms began blaring as dozens of beings found themselves suddenly free for the first time in years. The chaos that followed was extraordinary. Some slaves ran immediately, seeking any exit they could find. Others stood frozen, unable to process the sudden change in their circumstances. A few turned on their former captors with years of suppressed rage finally finding expression. In the confusion, Marcus led his group through the maintenance tunnels toward the waste processing center. The route was cramped and unpleasant, but it was also unguarded. The station's security systems were focused on the main corridors where most of the escaped slaves were creating havoc. Kira found herself helping Vera navigate the narrow passages, noting that the other woman's biomechanical augmentations had been damaged by years of abuse. Jorin moved with surprising grace despite his obvious malnutrition, his crystalline implants still retaining some of their original functionality. The waste disposal facility was exactly what Kira had predicted, an automated system for processing station garbage with several small ships designed to ferry debris to nearby asteroid processing facilities. Marcus quickly identified the most suitable vessel while Kira worked on overriding its security systems.
"Can you fly this?" Marcus asked as the ship's systems came online.
"Silithai learned to pilot before we learned to walk," Kira replied, her hands already moving over the control interfaces. "But this isn't designed for atmospheric flight, and the Korthak will be scanning for any ship leaving the station." Outside, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. Korthak boarding parties had reached the station and were conducting systematic searches of every section. The freed slaves had scattered throughout the facility, turning a simple inspection into a complex tactical situation that was straining even Imperial resources.
"We need a distraction," Marcus said, studying the tactical display.
"Something big enough to cover our escape." Kira looked at the station's power distribution systems and smiled for the first time in 3 days. "I have an idea, but it's going to make us very unpopular with everyone involved." Her plan was elegant in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. The orbital station's position between 3 asteroids wasn't just for convenience, it was maintained by a complex system of gravitational manipulators that required constant computer control. If those systems were disrupted at exactly the right moment, the station would begin drifting toward the largest asteroid, creating an emergency that would demand immediate attention from every ship in the system. "You're talking about potentially killing everyone on this station," Marcus pointed out.
"No," Kira corrected.
"I'm talking about creating a situation that requires immediate evacuation. The Korthak will have to choose between chasing us and preventing a major disaster."
"Even Imperial commanders aren't stupid enough to let a civilian station crash into an asteroid."
Jorin spoke for the first time since his release, his voice hoarse but determined.
"Do it. The people here profit from suffering. Let them experience some fear for once."
The execution required precise timing and a deep understanding of gravitational mechanics that only a Silithai engineer could provide. Kira worked through the calculations while Marcus prepared the ship for immediate departure and Vera helped modify the vessel's sensor profile to make it harder to detect. When the gravitational manipulators failed, the effect was immediate and dramatic. The station began a slow but inexorable drift toward the nearest asteroid, and every ship in the system received emergency broadcasts requesting immediate assistance. The Korthak fleet found themselves faced with a choice between pursuing escaped slaves and preventing a humanitarian disaster that would be visible across several star systems. They chose to help with the evacuation, just as Kira had predicted. Imperial doctrine emphasized maintaining the appearance of civilization even when conducting the most brutal operations, and allowing thousands of beings to die in an accident would undermine Korthak diplomatic relations throughout the sector. The small waste disposal ship slipped away from the station in the chaos, its modified sensor signature making it appear to be just another piece of debris scattered by the gravitational disruption. Marcus piloted them toward a rendezvous point he had established in the outer system while Kira worked with Jorin and Vera to plan their next moves. "There are still 10 more slaves to find," Marcus reminded them as they reached safe distance from the station. "And now the Korthak know that someone is actively freeing Silithai slaves," Vera added, speaking for the first time. Her voice carried the mechanical precision of someone whose neural pathways had been damaged by years of forced integration with alien technology.
Kira nodded, understanding the implications.
Their rescue operation had just become infinitely more dangerous, but it had also proven something important. The Korthak Empire, for all its power and reach, was not invincible. They could be outmaneuvered, confused, and forced to make choices that worked against their interests. "We'll need help," she said finally. "More ships, better intelligence, and resources that a single human operative can't provide." Marcus had been thinking the same thing. His original mission had been reconnaissance, locate Silithai survivors and assess their potential value to human defensive efforts. But the situation had evolved beyond anything his superiors had anticipated. The freed slaves weren't just sources of information, they were individuals with their own goals, skills, and determination to rebuild what had been lost. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying 4 beings who had been slaves that morning but were now fugitives working toward a larger purpose, the balance of power in the Outer Rim shifted in ways that no one fully understood yet. The Korthak Empire was vast and powerful, but it depended on fear and hopelessness to maintain control over its subjects. Hope was contagious, and freedom was an idea that could spread faster than any Imperial fleet could travel. The rescue of 4 Silithai slaves might seem insignificant in the larger context of galactic politics, but some changes began with single actions by individuals who refused to accept that the current situation was permanent. The universe was about to learn that humans and their allies had very different ideas about what constituted acceptable behavior, and that some lines should never be crossed regardless of the consequences. The hidden facility on Sanctuary Station bustled with activity unlike anything Kara had imagined possible when she first stepped off that slave transport 3 months ago. What had started as a simple rescue operation had evolved into something far more significant, a coordinated effort to not just free individual slaves, but to actively undermine the entire slave trade network that fed the Korthak Empire's expansion. Kara stood before a massive holographic display showing the defensive shield array that surrounded the station. The design was a hybrid of Silithai quantum mechanics and human engineering pragmatism, creating protection that was both elegant and brutally effective. Ships that approached with hostile intent found themselves facing energy barriers that could absorb directed energy weapons and deflect kinetic projectiles with equal efficiency. The shield generators are operating at 93% efficiency, she reported to the assembled group of humans and freed aliens who now comprised the station's leadership council. Power consumption is actually lower than predicted because the quantum resonance crystals are self-reinforcing once they achieve harmonic equilibrium. Admiral Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister and the ranking human military officer present, studied the technical readouts with satisfaction. The decision to support her brother's unauthorized rescue operations had been controversial within human command structure, but results had a way of justifying difficult choices. Sanctuary Station now housed over 300 freed slaves from dozens of species, each contributing specialized knowledge that was advancing human technology by decades. "What about offensive capabilities?" asked Commander Thrix, a reptilian saurian whose people had been among the first to fall to Korthak expansion. He had been freed from a mining operation 6 weeks ago and immediately volunteered his military expertise to help plan future rescue operations. Vera answered from her position at the biomechanical integration console, her damaged vocal cords giving her words a mechanical quality that somehow made them more authoritative. The shield matrix can be inverted to create focused energy beams capable of penetrating standard Imperial armor. Theoretical maximum range is approximately 50,000 kilometers, but practical combat range would be closer to 20,000. The transformation of Sanctuary Station from a hidden refuge into a genuine military threat had happened faster than anyone had expected. Each rescued slave brought not just their personal freedom but knowledge that had been accumulated over centuries of galactic civilization. Engineering techniques, military strategies, scientific principles, all of it had been preserved in the memories of beings that the Empire had treated as disposable resources. Marcus entered the command center carrying a datapad filled with intelligence from their latest network of contacts. The original plan to rescue 12 specific Silithai had expanded into a galaxy-wide operation that now involved sympathizers from multiple species and even some humans who had grown disgusted with their government's cautious approach to the slave trade. "We have a problem," he announced without preamble. "Imperial intelligence has connected our rescue operations to human involvement. They're demanding that Earth's government either hand over everyone involved or face direct military action." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Sanctuary Station was hidden in an asteroid field that made detection difficult but not impossible, and their defensive capabilities were impressive but had never been tested against a full Imperial battle group. More importantly, open warfare between humans and the Korthak Empire would drag other species into a conflict that could devastate entire sectors of the galaxy. "What's our government's response?" Admiral Chen asked. Marcus smiled grimly. "Officially, they're demanding proof of human involvement and suggesting that the Empire might be dealing with a rogue element that doesn't represent official policy."
Unofficially, they've authorized me to inform you that a human battle fleet is currently conducting exercises approximately 6 hours away from this position.
Kira felt her hearts racing as she processed the strategic situation. The careful balance that had allowed their rescue operations to continue was about to collapse entirely. But, as she looked around the command center at the faces of beings from dozens of worlds, she realized that something fundamental had changed in the past 3 months.
They weren't just escaped slaves anymore.
They were the core of a resistance movement that represented every species that had suffered under imperial expansion. The knowledge they had preserved and the technologies they had developed weren't just tools for survival, they were weapons that could change the balance of power throughout the galaxy.
How many ships can we field? Commander Thrix asked, his tactical mind already working through possibilities.
Jorin answered from the crystal resonance chamber where he had been growing the quantum matrices that powered their defenses. 17 ships with shield generators, plus the station's main defenses. Not enough to face a full Imperial battle group, but sufficient to make any attack extremely costly.
We're not trying to win a conventional battle, Admiral Chen pointed out.
We're trying to buy time for the political situation to develop in our favor. Every day this conflict continues gives other species time to choose sides.
The next 6 hours passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation.
Throughout the station, beings who had been broken by years of slavery worked alongside humans and other free species to prepare for a battle that would determine whether their fragile community could survive. The irony wasn't lost on any of them, they were using technologies developed through slavery to fight against the system that had enslaved them. Kira found herself assigned to the main shield control center, working alongside 3 other Silithai engineers to coordinate the defensive systems. The quantum resonance crystals hummed with energy that she could feel in her bones, a harmonic frequency that reminded her of the crystal singers from her homeworld. For a moment, she could almost hear the music that had once filled Silithai cities before the Empire silenced them forever. "Contact," announced the sensor operator, a young human named David whose enhanced cybernetic implants allowed him to process multiple data streams simultaneously.
Imperial Task Force dropping out of hyperspace.
3 heavy cruisers, 2 battleships, and a command carrier. Estimated complement of 140 combat vessels. Through the main viewport, space began to fill with the angular shapes of Imperial warships, their dark hulls bristling with weapons that could sterilize entire continents. The command carrier was particularly intimidating, a massive vessel that served as both fleet coordination center and mobile base for planetary assault operations. "They're hailing us," reported the communications officer.
Admiral Chen straightened her uniform and stepped in front of the main display. "Put them through."
The figure that appeared on screen was exactly what Kira had expected, a Korthak fleet commander whose forearms bore the scars of multiple campaigns and whose eyes held the cold certainty of someone who had never experienced defeat. Behind him, she could see the bridge of an Imperial command ship, filled with beings from conquered worlds who had been forced to serve their conquerors. "I am Fleet Commander Vorthak of the 15th Imperial Battle Group," he announced in Galactic Standard. "This facility has been identified as a center of terrorist activity directed against the legitimate interests of the Korthak Empire. You will surrender immediately and submit to Imperial justice, or face the consequences of your actions." "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Free Species Alliance," she replied, using a title that had been invented approximately 30 seconds earlier but somehow seemed perfectly appropriate. "This station exists to provide sanctuary to beings fleeing persecution and slavery. We are operating within established galactic law regarding protection of refugees."
"Galactic law recognizes no authority higher than Imperial sovereignty," Vorthak responded.
"The beings you harbor are lawful property of the Empire, acquired through legitimate conquest.
Their return is not negotiable."
What followed was a carefully choreographed dance of diplomacy and military posturing that both sides understood was primarily for the benefit of observers throughout the galaxy. Communications were being monitored by dozens of species, and the political implications of the exchange would resonate far beyond the immediate tactical situation. "The Empire has 30 seconds to begin withdrawal or face defensive action," Admiral Chen announced finally.
Commander Vorthak's response was immediate and predictable.
The Imperial fleet opened fire with a coordinated barrage that would have overwhelmed any standard defensive installation. Energy beams and kinetic projectiles filled space with deadly light as the largest military force in the galaxy attempted to crush a refuge that had been built by escaped slaves and rogue humans. The first test of Silithai shield technology in actual combat was spectacular. The quantum barriers absorbed and redirected the incoming fire, creating patterns of energy that looked more like art than warfare. Some beams were reflected back at their sources, while others were channeled into the station's power grid, actually strengthening the defenses with each attack. Kara watched the tactical displays with growing amazement as systems she had helped design performed beyond their theoretical capabilities. The hybrid technology created by combining human engineering with Silithai quantum mechanics wasn't just effective, it was revolutionary. The Imperial Fleet's second barrage was more focused, targeting specific areas where their sensors suggested the shields might be weaker. But the Silithai had learned from 3 years of slavery to think in ways their captors couldn't predict. The shield generators were distributed throughout the asteroid field, creating overlapping defensive zones that became stronger when attacked simultaneously. "Return fire," Admiral Chen ordered. The station's offensive systems engaged with devastating effect. Energy beams that had been theoretical constructs 6 months ago reached out across 50,000 kilometers of space to strike Imperial vessels with precision that no human weapons system could match. The shields that had made the Empire's ships nearly invulnerable to conventional weapons offered little protection against quantum-enhanced energy projectors. 3 Imperial cruisers suffered major damage before Commander Vorthak ordered a tactical withdrawal to reassess the situation. The engagement had lasted less than 20 minutes, but its implications would reshape galactic politics for generations. "All stations report minimal damage," David announced from his sensor post. "Shield generators operating at full efficiency. No casualties reported." The celebrations that followed were brief but heartfelt. Beings who had been slaves that morning had just defeated the most powerful military force in known space, using technologies developed from their own suffering and knowledge preserved despite years of systematic brutality. But Kira understood that the real victory wasn't military, it was philosophical. For the first time in centuries, someone had successfully resisted imperial expansion and lived to broadcast the achievement across the galaxy. Every species that had been conquered, enslaved, or threatened would now know that the Empire was not invincible. Over the following days, as news of the battle spread through galactic communication networks, Sanctuary Station received visitors that no one had expected. Ships arrived carrying representatives from species that had been neutral in galactic politics for millennia, offering resources and expertise to the growing resistance movement. The Eternal Council, an alliance of ancient civilizations that had avoided contact with younger species for thousands of years, sent ambassadors to study the hybrid technologies that had made the victory possible. Several human colonies that had been pressured to remain neutral declared their support for the Free Species Alliance. Even some Korthak subject worlds began experiencing unrest as news of the successful resistance reached oppressed populations. Marcus found Kara in the observation deck where she often went to think, looking out at the stars that had once seemed so distant and hostile. The neural collar scars on her neck had faded to thin lines that were barely visible, but the changes in her eyes were permanent. She had regained something that slavery could never take away as long as the memory survived. "What happens now?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her. "Now we build," she replied simply. "The Silithai were builders before we were anything else. We built cities that touched the stars and technologies that made the impossible routine. The Empire destroyed our worlds, but they never understood that the real power was in the knowledge, not the objects." Through the viewport, they could see construction ships working to expand Sanctuary Station's capacity. The facility that had started as a refuge for escaped slaves was becoming a city, then a capital, and eventually it would become the foundation for something that the galaxy had never seen before, a truly free civilization built by voluntary cooperation between species. The slave markets of the Outer Rim continued to operate, but their business had become much more difficult as rescue operations multiplied and entire worlds began questioning the moral foundations of the slave trade. The Korthak Empire remained powerful, but for the first time in its expansion, it faced organized resistance backed by technologies it couldn't counter or comprehend. Kira touched the place where her neural collar had once rested, remembering the weight of chains that had seemed unbreakable. Freedom, she had learned, wasn't just the absence of slavery, it was the presence of choice, the power to build rather than simply endure, and the knowledge that even the darkest circumstances could be changed by individuals who refused to accept them as permanent. The stars outside the viewport seemed brighter now, filled with possibilities that hadn't existed when she was trapped in a cage on Zephyria Prime. Somewhere among those lights were other slaves waiting for rescue, other worlds seeking freedom, and other species ready to join the alliance that had started with one human's decision to pay an impossible price for the freedom of a stranger. The galaxy was changing, one rescue at a time, one freed mind at a time, one choice at a time. And, at the center of it all was the simple truth that Marcus had demonstrated when he first walked into that slave market: some things were more valuable than credits, some prices were too high for any civilized being to pay, and freedom was always worth fighting for, regardless of the cost.